It's spooky month, or almost spooky month. It's whatever time of the year you're watching this video. The point is, we're gonna look at some spooky comics and give some recs, because you might be in the mood to give yourself a little scare, and that mood can strike anytime. Everybody, of course, has their own metric as to what freaks them out and why. So for what we're gonna look at, these are just some works that really spoke to me, and hopefully you find something that you'll enjoy. I also did try to branch out a little bit from the titles that I oftentimes saw making lists. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but just for the variety. Although, some of the mainstays did make it on. With all that preamble out of the way, I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, let's dive into some recs. In no particular order. First up we have When the Wind Blows by Raymond Briggs. This was a graphic novel from 1982 that was subsequently adapted into an animated film in 1986. There is also a radio adaptation. Now, many may be more familiar with Briggs for his more child-friendly work, like The Snowman. So for those known for things like that, this may be a bit of a departure. The story follows an older retired couple who are mauled off of Briggs's parents who survive a nuclear blast. Only because of poor governmental instructions, partially because they're just stopgaps to keep people from panicking, but they do also follow them incorrectly, because there's also the factor of their own inability to understand the changes in the times and warfare. And so they find themselves at the mercy of the wasteland. It's a bleak and sad work, rendered all the more horrifying by how realistic the characters feel, how human. That added layer of him modeling them off of his own parents and basically extrapolating how they would react in the situation is a little chilling. The instructions they're working off of, and even some of the panels in the book and the adaptation, mirror the guidebooks for how to survive a nuclear holocaust. It also makes some artistic decisions that become rather stark because of Briggs's art style. They stand out in a way they wouldn't in a style that's more overtly grotesque. But because Briggs's style is more commonly associated with happier fare for children, there's another layer that's added here. He also plays with some different techniques inside of the graphic novel, and that's interesting to see. It's easy to dismiss this as an anti-nuclear war piece, a byproduct of the Cold War, to try and isolate those fears in that time. But not only can it be brought forward, but there are more layers there. At times, the characters even make decisions that are meant to frustrate the reader, just as a younger person may find themselves frustrated at a parent's lack of understanding of something. So there's some themes of generational disconnect, social malaise. All of this is wrapped up in a sense of inevitable dread. This isn't scream out loud scary, or curl your skin scary. You're probably not gonna have to leave the lights on, but it's chilling on a kind of existential level. I would also recommend the 1986 film. It makes some different choices for certain scenes.
Come back, you stupid and get in the shelter!
And it utilizes a fascinating combination of real sets and animation. For example, when the bomb hits, they really blow up the set house, and then the characters are animated among that rubble. It gives it a very unique feel. When the Wind Blows, not feel good, but certainly haunting. Next up, Beautiful Darkness, not to be confused with the YA novel of the same name. This is a translation from the French title, Jolies Ténèbres. It was originally published in 2009, but got an English translation in 2018. It was written by Marie Pommepuis and Fabienne Vellman, with art by Sébastien Cossette and Marie, under their pseudonym of Kerskoe. This story follows Aurora, a young, dainty, and pretty girl on a date with a prince named Hector, when suddenly the area around them starts melting, forcing them to flee along with the other denizens. It is revealed as they leave that they are leaving the corpse of a young girl. The rest of the novel follows the quest for survival of these little tiny creatures, and the reader is left to piece together as all of this is going on, just what are they? Are they leftover vestiges of part of this little girl's personality? Are they her imaginings that now, with her being dead, have nowhere else to go and have fled? Is her death part of what ends up warping some of them so much, without her as the anchor to control their development? However, all of this pales in comparison to seeing the degeneration of the freed people as they form alliances and slowly change throughout the course of the novel, particularly Aurora. The contrast of art style with subject matter here is quite deliberate. It aligns with the title, but it also makes what's passing tolerable, because as can be seen from the initial corpse panel, this art duo is more than capable of making something that's a bit more grim. And they do work some of that into the background, especially as the corpse begins to rot. This juxtaposition also reflects the themes being worked through, trying to find purpose and beauty even in the metaphorical darkness, and how sometimes what can be found can be quite terrible. This is a more subtle horror outing, with lots of the scare factor again not being kind of jump scares or fear of monsters, but more abject terror at the cruelty of the real world. This really driven home by the juxtaposition against the fantastic. All of it blanketed under the idea of the overall sadness of a life cut short. A girl left alone in the woods to rot. The ending of this one, depending upon how you read it and what you take from it in terms of what it means, is also quite horrifying. It's disturbing, but I won't spoil it for you. Next up, it's one of the entries that makes all the lists. It's Uzumaki. This is by Junji Ito. It's the scary book about spirals. It recently timed for recording got an adaptation, and the production staff making it said they felt cursed. I can see why. Junji Ito is a master of the Japanese horror manga scene, and just the horror scene in general. Uzumaki, which translates to spiral, was a serial seinen manga, which originally ran from 1998 to 1999. It was weekly. I can't show as many images for this because manga plays a bit of a different game with copyright, but we'll show what we can. We'll get those iconic ones in there for you. Now, this has since been collected into trades, tome, complete editions. The first serialized English translation appeared in 2001 in Pulp magazine. The story is a series of interconnected tales surrounding the spiral and the horror that the spiral brings to this small town and these people's lives. While it sounds like a rather silly concept, from the first chapter, Ito really manages to establish the tone. He's able to create a scene of discomfort and visceral unease by pairing this building narrative dread with highly detailed body horror art moments. The tales range, and since this has a more episodic-esque feel, the ones that land for different people will of course be different. There is an overarching plot, but that comes more into play in the later issues. But it does build upon the things that were established in the first few. I'll highlight two that really stuck with me. One is the tale of the boy that is slowly mutating into a human snail. His body is developing this spiral growth that hardens and becomes a shell, and then his front becomes the part that he slides on. It's just bleh. This one stood out to me because it crept up on me. The first time I read it, I thought I was absolutely fine, but it's something that just kind of wormed its way into my brain and made me more and more uncomfortable. So it was especially discomforting when it was revisited later on in a big way. That really drove the horror home. The other tale is one set within a hospital. There are a few here, but I'm gonna focus on the one about the babies. Babies that there's something wrong with them, and so they need to be reinserted into their mothers post-birth. Not only is this a gruesome body horror moment that it rivals the end of The Brood, really. It's worse than The Brood, because in The Brood, the womb sacs were external. This is the babies going back into the bodies. It was a lot. So not only do you have this kind of visceral, grotesque layer, but there's also more to it than that. It taps into a parental fear, and it leans more towards the maternal. That's what it's working through. A fear that some have of their children sucking the life out of them. This story made that manifest. It's impressive because it's layered, and it speaks to the ability to pull from many different types of fears and present them in different ways. One cool thing about the collected edition is that it includes a story that he didn't end up publishing or putting in with the initial release. He left it out, and ultimately I think it was the right choice. It does kind of derail where the story ends up going, but it's interesting to have it here because it highlights how deliberate a lot of the choices were. Uzumaki, it's a staple by this point, but with good reason, and it's produced some absolutely unforgettable horror imagery. Next up, Fatale, a 24-issue series by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Although it was initially supposed to be 12, but then got extended to 24. The series initially ran from 2012 to 2014 and has since been collected into complete editions. Now, some may not consider Fatale to be a horror comic, even though the horror elements do manifest quite clearly. It's most often listed in the crime section, which for those familiar with the collaboration between Brubaker and Phillips, that will not be surprising to them. That tends to be the genre they work in. They like to focus on neo-noirs, and there is a lot of that there in this. The story follows Josephine, or Jo, a woman who is every bit the femme fatale archetype. The only thing is her life is just steeped in tragedy and horror with a seemingly Cthulhian origin. Like some kind of monster, Jo hypnotizes men to want to do anything for her, but it's not something she can control. This work is steeped in Lovecraftian layers. They don't overwhelm, but they're there. Fittingly, they're lurking below the surface. This work is playing a lot with the concept of the unseen horror running underneath all things. Gods and creatures we can't see living their lives parallel. Their energies impacting human lives, and they do go more into what happened to her, how this came to be. These two genres work very well together in this instance, and they create something unique. It's worth checking out if you're a fan of Lovecraftian elements, and also if you like genre fusions. Next up, Wild's End, this by Dan Abnett, with art by Ian J. Culbert. We're going to give a special spotlight to the first arc called First Light, although all of it's worth checking out. For First Light, I saw the release date for the first trade was 2015, with issue 1 saying it was released in 2014. There was a new miniseries that was released in 2023, but we're going back to the beginning of Wild's End. Wild's End is essentially a fusion between The Wind in the Willows and War of the Worlds. An alien invasion breaks out in this charming little British rural countryside town, and our protagonists need to try and get a grasp on what's happening as the situation just gets worse and worse. This one is another layered work. It takes full advantage of those warm, fuzzy feelings one has when one is dealing with those anthropomorphized creatures that one is most likely familiar with from fairy tales or books of their youth, like as mentioned, Wind in the Willows. They even draw the map out in a similar fashion how the Wind in the Willows one is laid out. I loved Wind in the Willows and also War of the Worlds, so I think I was the target audience. Now, the aliens here aren't particularly scary, and later on they'll even make mention of the fact that they resemble lampposts, but that's not really the point. This story does excellent character work. Each person, or well, animal, is so well fleshed out, you want all of them to make it out and to survive. And there are these extra sections. There are letters that are written, diary entries, newspaper entries, excerpts of the science fiction story that one character ghost wrote for her husband. There's a lot going on, a lot to dive into. But at the end of the day, what makes the story work is that there tends to be a part of one that wants these characters just have a nice idyllic existence. But that's what this is doing so well, bringing this sci-fi style horror into this setting. It's got kind of sci-fi vibes. And as the story goes on across the first initial 3 volumes, it just gets bigger and bigger. They're all good, but I have a soft spot for the nice self-contained nature of the first volume, as the characters are working their way through the countryside and figuring out what's going on and seeing just how big it's become. It's worth checking out. I don't hear a lot of people talk about this one. Maybe they are. Maybe I'm just in the wrong spot. These last 2 I mentioned are available on Global Comics. It's an app that's a digital comics hub. I know I've been talking about it a lot, but I've been using the heck out of it since I downloaded it. This is not a sponsored video, but I do have a discount code that I can give to you if you want to check it out, and we'll take 33% off your membership. It's GCX Casually. I'll put it down below in the description. If you click the link, you can apply it. You totally don't have to. I'm just obsessed with this app. I have read so many horror things on there while I was compiling this list and ultimately deciding what I wanted to put on it. But we're not done with the spooky. I have one more for you. I don't hold it up because I don't keep it in this room because it creeps me out. There are a couple of books actually that I don't keep in here for various reasons. That one and PTSD Radio, which if we do a follow-up, we'll make it on, they're not in here because they make me feel slightly cursed. The next one is The Number, 733042341536968 by Thomas Ott. This one really creeps me out. Even talking about it, you can't see it, but I'm getting little goosebumps. Something about Ott's ink work, it just gets to me. And this work is all in the art. There's no dialogue. There are a couple of signs written out here and there, but it's silent. The characters don't speak. This really works in the story's favor because there are some things that happen in here where one has to question, did it really happen? Was it supernatural? What went on here? Originally published in 2008, the story is about an executioner working death row who finds a number that an executed inmate had placed in a Bible in his cell. So he pockets it and he brings it home. As one can imagine based on the title, the number begins to impact his life. He starts to see parts of it everywhere and organize his life around it, first for good and then for ill. Now, this is an idea that's been played with in a variety of ways. Some might be thinking of the number 23, but there's something very uncomfortable about the number. There's an eeriness about the shadows and the art in this, even when things are going well. For example, the eyes on the dog he finds, the one that bears part of the number on its ear, they're almost demonic at points. And the way that some things transform in this and what the numbers go from being attached to the other things and the transformations that take place, particularly with the dog and what the dog transforms into. It's a work that while its end point is fairly known from the start, nothing good can come of this number. The journey is unique. And I'm admit it, I can't read this book at night. I can't do it. Even while scripting this, I wrote, edit this first, because I'm gonna have to edit this during the day. Maybe it doesn't do the same thing to you, but it does to me. This story is also a masterful use of silent storytelling. People associate picture books as a children's thing, and they understate the craftsmanship it takes to guide a person entirely through art. With only just a few words and signs, but they're not what's driving the story. It's all inside the illustrations. It takes skill to do that. We are coming to the end. I'll leave you on just a general recommendation of if you're trying to dip into some classics, the EC archives that collect a lot of those old horror comics, they're worth checking out if you're more into the classical type fare. And those stories really range in terms of the type of horror you're gonna get. Also, I just needed to wash my mind of the number. I do have many more recs, but 6 seemed like a good place to start. I didn't want to overwhelm you. If you like this, let me know by hitting that like button. Share your favorites down below. Give me 6 if you can. Maybe if we got enough overlap, we can do another one of these, but as chosen by you. If you're a member, be sure to vote on the spooky book that we're going to do for the book club month. It's going to be a spooky comic book. That's a very time recording message, but the book club is back, so we're going to be doing votes every month for members. Also, if you want more things like this, just recs, like more indie recs, let me know. Overflowing with books that I'm reading. This was fun to compile, and I hope you enjoyed it too. I hope you found something to read, or maybe avoid. Please share all your thoughts down below. While you're down there, please do all YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time today to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.